Okay, bright good morning to you and welcome to the May session for the Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. We have an exciting lineup and want to take care of a couple of technical issues first and then get going with our program. First, glad that many of you turned in early, and I'm sure that you've already done your audio setup, so we'll zip right through that. Just want to give you a quick reminder that everything that you type in the chat box can be seen by the moderators, even if you send it to an individual. So there is no such thing as privacy on Illuminate. Please leave your microphone button turned off, except when you're speaking. The microphone button is in the bottom left corner. It's kind of a gray graphic of an old-fashioned microphone, and if it's turned on, it has a yellow highlight around it. So please make sure that that's turned off unless you are the one who's speaking. We'll be recording this session and it'll be available on the web for you and other Master Gardeners in your group to look at later. And I just wanted to give you a quick introduction to the website for Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. Let me just take you there really quickly. We have a front page, and then on the front, the schedule and the handouts for each year are organized by year. So if you click on the year, it takes you to who the speakers are going to be, and if there are any handouts, those will be linked. Gives you background information about those speakers. We also have the downlink location, so all the county offices that we know of that are downloading the session and showing it at their county office are listed here with directions for how to get there and contact information for the agent in charge there. If you are down linking at your county office and you're not listed on this list, please let me know and I'll get you added to it. There's background information about the plant clinic and the departments that participate in the program. We have the schedule, my handouts are up, and then there's other information that you might be interested in. So come check out that site and get information about what's coming up. And there's the website address again for you to see. The sessions are the second, whoops, a little heavy on the forward button there, sorry. Now you've had a preview of the whole session. Okay, so we are the second Tuesday of the month in May, June, July, and August, and it's from 10 to 12. Today's program, I am Lucy Bradley, and I'm doing a quick introduction and will be your hostess with the mostest for the program this morning. I'm the Urban Horticulture Specialist in the Department of Horticulture at NC State. Our special speaker was Steve Bambara in the Department of Entomology, and he's going to be talking about pests of urban trees. And then we'll have Mike Munster from Plant Pathology talking about current diseases, and David Steffen about current insects. We have two exceptional technical support people online with us this morning to help us get started with transforming from a satellite program to an Illuminate program. John Dorner and Lee J. Hicks are both here, so if you have questions, please type them in the chat box and we'll get answers to you as quickly as possible. Lee J. is going to give us a quick overview and introduction to Illuminate and how you can participate in the program. So Lee J., I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lucy, and good morning, everyone. My name is Lee J. Hicks. I'm going to give you a quick orientation to our presentation environment. The first thing that I want to show you is actually not on this slide, but I want to tell you that if you are in a room where you are displaying it for a lot of people, you have your speakers set up in a different way. What I want to do is walk you through editing your preference so that when you speak to ask a question, we don't have an echo feedback. If you go up to the Tools menu in Illuminate and click on Preferences, you get a Preferences window. If you look under Audio, there is a selection for mute sound. Make sure that you have checked mute speakers when talk is pressed. That will eliminate any feedback that we have. I'll also put those directions in the chat room. Okay, so in using Illuminate, we are going to be taking advantage of some of the features. Let me change my pointer here. The first thing is our polling options. You should see a green check and a red X at the top of your screen. Go ahead and give me a green check if you see this. Good. It looks like most of you are able to find the polling options near the top. I'm going to go ahead and clear those out. Another area that I want to point you to is the emoticon area and also the stepped away area. We have smiley faces, confused, we have claps and thumbs down. If you're having a great day, why don't you let me know, give me a smiley face, and if you're kind of grumbly, go ahead and do that as well. Good, lots of smiling faces. I like to see that. Also, that stepped away, the little door, that will not log you out. That will just let us know that you have stepped away from your computer, and it's just so that we don't call on you and you're inadvertently not there. Another tool that I'm going to refer you to is the file transfer tool. It's the little manila folder with the green squiggly. If you will click on that icon now, you will see that there is a file called Illuminate Participant Quick Reference.pdf. If you would like to save that file, click on the disk icon and that will save to your computer, and you can reference that through the session or afterwards if you need to. If you could give me a green check if you were able to open that file transfer. Okay. There are quite a few of you who have not been able to do so, so I'll walk you through that process again. If you click on the manila folder with the green squiggly, it's near the top, that will open up your file transfer option. You can click on the disk to save the file called Illuminate Participant Quick Reference. And again, once you've done that, just give me a green check. Okay. All right, and if you have questions at any time, you can type them into the chat area, and I'll point to that. You type in to the white area. You can press the send button or press return or enter. And as Lucy indicated, all of your chat discussions are recorded in Illuminate, even private discussions between you and another participant. Okay, I believe that's all of those are all the features that we'll be using today. If you have any questions, again, type them in the chat, and either I or John will answer them as soon as we can.
Thank you, Lee. Our first speaker this morning is Dr. Steve Bambara from the Department of Entomology. He's going to be doing a presentation on pests of the urban tree. Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Lucy, and thanks for the promotion. I'm enjoying this. I've got my shoes off and my feet up, so those of you who can't hear this or get it, you're probably better off. So I think that this topic is been kind of neglected a little bit over the last few years, and really there's a need for it. So just decided that we would kind of touch on this, and we don't have nearly enough time to cover this whole area of pests and urban trees. It's just too much stuff, but we'll do a little bit of an overview here. And then if you've got questions, we can deal with those questions, and hopefully that will help you out. So I divided this up into just 4 groups, because these are the 4 groups that I think would most likely get you the most questions, or that you would see the most problems on. So I just picked scale insects, galls on oaks. There's galls on all sorts of stuff, but the oaks seem to be the most dramatic and most noticeable to a lot of people. Then we'll talk about some of the defoliators, and then those little borers and stuff. So the scale insects, those of you are probably pretty familiar with it. It's somewhere or another, and scale insects really don't even look like insects, and you rarely even see the actual insect. You see the covering of the scale. And that can be pretty indicative of the type of scale that you've got for identification. And the scales, entomologists have broken scales down into soft or armored scales, and the soft scales generally have a soft armor, and the armored scales generally have a hard armor. So you ought to be able to catch on to that. And they have different characteristics to them. Some are, tend to be worse than others, and we can't go through them all. But certain scales may cause a branch to die back, for example. So it could be serious. It could be a little bit more than just cosmetic. And some, particularly the soft scales, may also create honeydew. I think you're familiar with that. And in an urban setting, the honeydew can be a problem or a complaint by a homeowner or a town or something like that. And then there are scales on lots of trees, and oftentimes they are not noticed, but if a tree becomes stressed, the scales either multiply better and or are noticed a little bit more. So they tend to be a little bit stress related. Going on to the honeydew, I think lots of you are familiar with honeydew related to aphids, and some of the scales will produce this honeydew. So particularly if you have trees along the street, or maybe even just in your yard, and the tree is dropping a lot of honeydew, or the scale or aphids are dropping a lot of honeydew onto a car or some surface like that that people use, then that can be a bit of a problem. So besides getting in your car well, in my case, I park under an oak tree, and when I leave in the afternoon, lots of times I have honeydew all over my windshield. So that's certainly one indicator. But if you see ants climbing up a tree, they have really no reason to be up that tree as far as their business. But if there are aphids or scale or honeydew up on that tree, then they are interested. So if you see ants in a tree climbing up the bark, then you have reason to suspect something. I've also seen yellow jackets, for example, visiting shrubs that have lots of honeydew and scale insects. Of course, be careful that there's not actually a yellow jacket nest inside that shrub, but just be careful. So these can be indicators of a scale or even an aphid problem. So for scale management, particularly, remember here we are dealing in the urban environment, so we want to use things that are effective and safe. So the horticultural oils are great choices for this. They are effective. They are effective as effective as most of the other products. We call them safer because in the sense that the product, an active ingredient, is a lot safer, but it also is not very persistent in the environment, and it is much kinder on some of the beneficials. So the horticultural oils are somewhat specific, and I use the term somewhat because they will kill lots of different little soft-bodied critters that are out there, but they are very timing dependent. So you have to know what scale you've got, really, and know when the crawler stage is out, which is the vulnerable stage with no protection, and apply the horticultural oils at that time. So they are specific because of the timing that you are using. And the other part of this, that once it has dried, it is basically innocuous. So it's a contact insecticide for soft-bodied fragile insects, and it is timing dependent, and once it's dried, then it is no longer doing anything to anybody. So that's the great part of it. And in a municipal setting, that's also great, or even in a yard, lots of people are very much for this. One little bit of a warning is to try to perhaps make sure that there aren't a lot of parked cars underneath trees at the time of some kind of an application like that. We also have some systemic products, imidacloprid, which is Merit, and Dinotecturan, which is Safari. Homeowners can get access to imidacloprid products, and that little soft word right there, I practice my little doohickey here. Soft means soft scale, in the sense that these, the imidacloprid enters the tree in a certain way, and soft scales will suck sap from different parts of the tissue. So imidacloprid can be effective systemic for soft scales, but not the armored scale or the hard scale. In contrast to that, the Safari or the Dinotecturan is in fact effective also against the armored scales. Now I also have down here other, and there are lots of other things, that even 7 is effective against crawlers, etc., but we don't generally promote that because in this area because of the non-target effects and the harm to the beneficials. And there are also even some more potent systemics that can sometimes be directly injected into the trees, and that's really not my favorite way of dealing with that. So now we have galls on oaks, and again, we do have, I mentioned earlier, we have galls on all sorts of trees, but the oaks seem to have the biggest collection of dramatic ones. And I guess a gall, by definition, and I'm making this up, is more or less some of the plant cells gone wild, and it's a bit almost like a tumor. And there can be different insects that create the plant tissue to grow differently for their own protection or benefit. A lot of them are tiny wasps. We have some flies and certain other insects. And you can get this myriad of very interesting galls that form on the trees. Here's a few others. This gouty oak gall and sweet potato gall, sometimes called, too, are pretty evident on some of the larger oak trees and get a lot of attention and a lot of worry from people out in the public and the homeowner, etc. As far as what you can do about it, this is really my recommendation for gall management. Just kind of get out your chair and watch them and enjoy them. There have been a number of studies that have just plastered trees with pesticides over and over. The timing is really important, the coverage is really important and difficult, and some of these things have alternate hosts, and also the galls don't go away immediately. For the most part, the galls are not killing the tree, it's a cosmetic thing. So treatment has been very expensive and really marginally effective at the best. I had one arborist who told me he was able to effect some management with certain galls by injecting Bidrin, or a fairly potent product, directly into the tree for at least 2 consecutive years. So that's really more effort than is worth it as far as I'm concerned, and a little bit of risk to the trees too. It's not, the trunk injections or bowl injections are not necessarily without their risks. So now we'll move on to defoliators, and I'm just going to start off with the orange striped oakworm. This critter, little caterpillar, will consume the leaves on oaks primarily in the summer. They get going, and then late summer, midsummer, late summer is when they really become noticed. And in the background here we have a line of oak trees at Oak Grove School, as it turns out, and this is in fact summer, and these trees have been fairly well defoliated, and they were defoliated for at least 3 consecutive years, but then the last 2 years there was no defoliation. And my deduction here on this is that these previous 2 years we had a lot of drought, and the ground was very hard because these overwinter in the ground, and they have to go down to pupate and have to come out to emerge, and the ground is probably too hard for them to deal with this little transition. So we have some on campus too, and defoliating the tree clearly isn't good for it, but it hasn't killed the tree either. Lots of times there can be a bunch of frass and fecal material that's down below the tree, so on the sidewalk or on cars, and that's an additional thing that for some reason people don't seem to like caterpillar poop on their cars. But and I think too, these trees are not anywhere near full grown. They're pretty large, but they're not full grown. And larger trees, I haven't seen any full-size trees actually being totally stripped. The eastern tent caterpillar is very common, and that's a springtime caterpillar, a fuzzy caterpillar that webs the crotches of trees, lots of times really cherry trees and such like that. After they are done consuming the foliage, they crawl off to pupate somewhere, and consequently you can find them crawling all over your house or wherever if you had an infestation nearby. Very similar to the fall webworm, except the fall webworm occurs later in the year and webs the ends of the branches instead of the crotches. So here's the ends of the branches here. And this is also a little fuzzy caterpillar. Control measures for these, you can use pesticides, but mechanical destruction of the webs works the best. And we'll talk about some caterpillar management in a second. Yeah, this is not recommended generally. It can cause off-target effects, though I understand it's a lot of fun, and I would love to get this for myself. Now, fall cankerworm is something that I don't see very much of really here in Raleigh, but I wanted to bring it up because down in Mecklenburg County particularly, for unknown reasons, for decades, this fall cankerworm has been a problem. And there are neighborhoods of willow oaks, mature willow oaks in Charlotte that are defoliated and or attacked every year. And there's some place in Canada, a little neighborhood in Canada, some town in Canada that has the same sort of problem, and I suspect there's other places. Even though this occurs across a lot of the eastern half of the country, the beneficials and the predators and diseases tend to hold this in check, except for Mecklenburg County. I'm not sure if it had anything to do with the bobcats leaving or not, but anyway, it's been going on for quite a while. So the timing of this is like right now, here at this time, the caterpillars are out and they're starting to munch on leaves. And they will munch little holes, and they'll munch on the edges, etc., and make a tree pretty darn ratty. What happens, though, is in November and December, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, the moths, which are, the female moths anyway, which are in the soil and pupating, will emerge, and this is one right there. And they have no wings or useless wings, and they crawl up the tree and lay eggs in the branches at the top of the tree, and then those eggs hatch out and turn into the caterpillars that we're talking about right here. So consequently, what you see here with these bands on the trees, these are barriers that have sticky material on them, hence that whenever the moths climb up the trunks of the trees, they get stuck in this, and it greatly reduces the number of moths that can get up and lay eggs. So that's been a large part of the control measures for fall cankerworm. They also do a lot of spraying in Charlotte area also for these things. So it's been a bit of a problem for all of those people in that area. Okay. One mentioned bagworms, and bagworms are also caterpillars that will munch on really probably 60 different hosts, lots of different hosts, deciduous and evergreen alike, but they are mostly a problem on the evergreens because they defoliate them and can create a problem with those. So these caterpillars start out in the spring. Pretty soon, I haven't checked lately, but they start out in the spring and start to munch on the plants, and as the summer goes along, they'll get bigger and bigger, and these cases that contain the plant material get bigger and bigger, and the plant starts getting more bare, etc. And eventually there, at the end of the summer or early August, it could be really bad if nothing is done. So in pest news, here we put out little warnings about when you might start thinking about treating if you have bagworms. And we'll give you a little bit of warning, but really any time before midsummer would be okay. So caterpillar management in general, the hand picking or mechanical destruction of web masses or bags works quite well. Now, clearly there are instances when a tree is too tall or you got too many of them that's not practical, so pesticides might be appropriate. Excuse me. And Bacillus thuringiensis is a nice environmental product that a lot of people like, and this is most appropriate in the spring or whenever the caterpillars are small. So that works well. And then there's a list of lots of different things that you can use depending on what your choices and desires are, and we even have an insect growth regulator that is available. Now, this is the hemlock woolly adelgid, and it's not exactly a defoliator. It's not a caterpillar, and I didn't know where to stick it, so I just threw it in here. Those of you farther west who deal with the hemlock woolly adelgid, if you've had to deal with it, you're probably already familiar with this. But this is an introduced insect that has been moving down into the state and across the state wherever hemlocks are found, and it's a bit like an aphid, but there are some differences, and it likes to stay protected in this little fuzzy material here, this little woolly material here, so that protects them from predators and somewhat from pesticides, etc. And the management for this, it can, I should mention if you're not familiar with it, it can kill a tree, it can totally defoliate it, and do quite a lot of harm. And since this is a major forest tree along the Appalachians all the way up north, then this is quite a serious thing. And a lot of us are very concerned about it. So we have some products that fortunately are very effective for hemlock woolly adelgid, but it would really be only in a landscape setting. It can't really do all this in a forest setting. So we have dinotephuran, which I mentioned as safari already, and imidacloprid. These are systemics that are taken up by the tree and will kill the adelgid as it is feeding. We have as a topical spray, horticultural oils also work fairly well, but then you've got that problem of coverage, and if you've got a tall tree, getting it all up into there, etc. We have a few biological predators that have been released. The North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Sciences or Services is raising and releasing these little predatory beetles, and there has been some benefit to it, but clearly that is not going to be the solution to this whole problem. So down here on the left, we've got a picture of doing some spraying. That's again labor intensive and costly. And then also we can apply some of the systemics to the root zone particularly is the best way to get that on in there. Now, we also have borers, and I kind of clump these things together as beetles and moths, or maybe I should say I separated them as beetles and moths. Most of the borers, not all of them, but most of the borers fall into these two orders. And Amongst this, we have 3 areas. First is the long-horned beetles, and they have long antennae that look like horns, consequently the long-horned beetle. And then we have a bunch of bark beetles and ambrosia beetles, and these tend to be little tiny groups of beetles that feed underneath the bark and oftentimes will cultivate fungi and spread diseases and create all sorts of problems. Then we have flat-headed borers. These are easily told by this thorax and head area here that is sort of flat from the front anyway. That's why I call them flat-head borers. They're diagnostic here because of this D-shaped exit hole. The other longhorn beetles are round, or round-headed borers have round holes, so this flat-headed borer has a flat-shaped hole. And this is characteristic of this metallic wood-boring beetle that we see right here. So that's the other kind of beetle, major beetle that we have that falls into the boring category, as this talk is also. Now, twig girdlers aren't really borers, but these are long-horned beetles, and I wanted to mention them because in the landscape, in the home landscape particularly, I think you're going to see this and get some calls on it, so I wanted to mention it. And this longhorn beetle is really very neat because it does a very nice pruning job, girdling job on some of the terminal twigs, cuts it off almost to the end, but not quite, and then this part will break off and fall to the ground, and usually you'll see leaves still attached to the branches. And you could have a yard with 50 or 100 of these branches on the ground, and typically it would be oaks and hickories that you would see this with. And the female is going to lay her egg in different places along this twig, and then the egg hatches out and stays inside this twig. So a great way to get rid of these is pick up all these twigs and destroy them. Don't just throw them in a pile somewhere, but pick them up and destroy them, and you'll get rid of the twig girdler fairly quickly. Then we have the southern pine bark beetle, and this has been around forever, and periodically has outbreaks. And the outbreaks tend to be a bit confined in a sense. Now, I say confined, it could be a couple of acres, it could be 50 acres or something like that. And if it's your property, then it does concern you. If it happens to be in a nice pine tree next to your house, it will likely die and threaten your house, so you're going to have to do something about it. This is behind my house. I had about 3 years ago, southern pine beetles came in there and killed a bunch of the loblollies there. And this is kind of, we had a windstorm 6 or 8 months ago, or maybe just 6 months ago, and a lot of debris fell out of there. And you can see it's not very dark all in this area. It's kind of missing some needles. So it can do a lot of damage there, and the control for this really, there aren't very many chemicals that you can use. If you see this attacking your trees and you get on it ahead of time, you can do some protective bark sprays and get a little bit of help out of it. If maybe you had if you had 2 trees in your yard and one was being attacked, you might try to protect the other one. So this is the southern pine bark beetle control, and usually one application is sufficient. Basically, you have to cut down the tree and remove it at your earliest convenience to reduce that as a reservoir, remove that as a reservoir for attacking other trees. It does provide some impetus for making a cake. This is a stump cake that I made for my father-in-law's birthday. There you go. Okay, so moving right along. I just can't hear all the roaring laughter, unfortunately, on this Illuminate, The jokes just aren't as rewarding. Oh, all right, some smiley faces. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so moving right along, we have some 2 hands raised. All right, anyway. Oh, thumbs down. Who said that? Mike and Dave. Shame on you. Wait till you get up. So we also want to mention some clear-wing moth borers. And the clear-wing moths basically all resemble wasps. That is their defense. They mimic wasps, so that birds and things like that will be less likely to attack them. And there's a whole bunch of these. I probably won't remember any of them. Peachtree borer, lilac borer, and I don't know, all these other grapefruit borer. And these little caterpillars, okay, the moths will lay eggs and the eggs hatch, and the caterpillars bore through the bark and get into the plant, into the stems usually, and can do a lot of damage, girdling, etc. And you'll oftentimes see some oozing coming out of the bark. And here we have some of the exuviae, the little pupil skins that the moths come out of, and they oftentimes stick out of the trees. A little bit of the bark protective sprays are a little more effective with this group. So if you have some susceptible things, lots of the autoleucon laurels get borers, and peaches and related get borers, and so it may be that you have to resort to some protective sprays on a kind of regular basis to take care of these. Once they get inside, not so much you can do really about that. There are lots of pheromone traps for many of these clear-wing borers and some of the beetles. So it could be for your timing. If you've got an issue with these and you expect it, then you could put out some pheromone traps and do some protective spraying as soon as they emerge. Probably you're not going to do this in your yard, maybe in a more larger setting. So I touched on this borer management or lack of it a little bit earlier. In the past we used lindane, and that's gone. Dimethoate, that's gone. Dursban, there are only a few instances where Dursban can still be used as a bark spray, and your yard and residents are not part of it, so you might as well forget that. So what we are left with is Astro, which is a permethrin product, and bifenthrin in the trade name of Onyx have been used a lot for protective bark sprays and have been fairly successful at that. You see it a lot, and the nursery people use these a lot and are more or less happy with that since we lost Dursban and lindane. Now down here I mentioned systemics. Most of these borers will not respond to or not be killed by a systemic pesticide that is taken up by the plant because the product is just not getting into the plant where the borers are. There's one exception, and that is the flat-headed borers, chestnut and lilac borer, and emerald ash borer, for example, that get underneath the bark and bore and do a lot of feeding in that cambial layer. So something like imidacloprid or merit would in fact have some benefit and protective value for bronze birch borer or whatever might be around there in that case. So that's sort of the exception to this whole thing. And we're doing some work, well not me personally, but entomologists are doing some work to try to find some other systemics that will work for some of these other things. And fall, I just put fall because that seems to be the recommended time to apply imidacloprid for this type of borer, so that it gets up into the tree for spring, so that the next generation is taken care of. So the urban environment now in general has its own set of stresses, and if you have the ability to be on the ground floor of planning, then it would behoove you to do whatever you can to minimize stresses in the urban environment. And reducing the tree stress could be related to choosing the correct plant material, and whether it's a stress-tolerant tree or whatever, picking a good site for it, making sure that it's appropriate plant for that particular site, and then preparing the site properly in the first place. So choosing the correct plant material, we have some plants, some trees that are less susceptible to certain problems than others, and will do okay growing up out of a concrete pot, basically, or so on and so forth. But I put this picture down here. This is a hedge maple, and it looks real nice, but I'm looking at this big mulch pile here, which I'm not very crazy about, and then I don't know how far down this street this row of maples go. And if you notice here, I mentioned diversity. If we get anything that takes out all the maples, or takes out all the ashes, or takes out all the elms, or takes out all the chestnuts, or whatever, and we've seen all of that, then you're left with nothing. So the monoculture encourages problems and also makes the problems worse than they might be otherwise. And think about stuff like ice vulnerability to ice damage. This is a silver maple, and we have ice storms certainly in the Piedmont area. And how about Bradford pear? Anybody out there have a Bradford pear? Well, we had wind on Saturday, and I saw several Bradford pears that had lost big chunks of limbs. So some of these trees may not really be the greatest for an urban environment, though they certainly have been planted. Then do a little bit of forethought. What's this tree going to look like 20 years from now? Many times, the thing that really gets me is how trees are planted too close to a house, for example, or a street or a road or a driveway, because it looks great quickly, but then down the road it ends up being a problem. Maybe you even have to take it out. Then what about the conditions, and where are you going to put this? Are you planting a tree basically in a pot along the sidewalk? How's that tree going to do? This could be vandalism, or as somebody it could be neglect or transplant shock. But the other part, as somebody reminded me, is the store owners don't really take too kindly to having a nice tree block their sign or their storefront. So, you know, who knows what happened here? Maybe the store owner didn't want that tree there. Now, preparing the site, you've heard that $1 million hole, and that's really very appropriate, particularly in an urban setting. The best preparation you can do. Don't neglect that. Protection is something that you have to protect an urban tree from vandalism or so on. One time I worked for a nursery, and we installed, or actually we didn't install, and we sold the town of Newark 200 trees, and in like 2 weeks' time somebody had come along and like pulled most of them down and broken them all. So vandalism is a problem, and the setting could also be a problem. Season, this is on campus behind Gardner Hall. They planted these trees in July a couple of years ago, and you can see that they didn't take too well. So many times you're also, and as bad and as this all seems, sometimes it's really not the person's fault who has to install these trees. There may be some regulation about installing landscape before construction, and so you're stuck. But if this is the case, make sure you get some kind of a guarantee on plant replacements, because there's a good chance that you're going to have to do that. Or water the heck out of it. Make sure you're on them. There's also environmental problems that can crop up, whether this was wind damage here on the left or vandalism. A wounded tree is much more attractive to insects, and really within hours insects can locate this. It's, you know, they smell almost like blood, the wound, and they will come and can attack a tree. So take care of damaged trees as soon as is possible. And then trees and turf really don't mix. So they are in competition with each other for sun and for water and so on, and they usually don't like the same fertilizer regimens. So if you've got turf around a tree, mulch it as far out as you can. That would be my recommendation. It will reduce your insect problems in the long run. Mulching, also this is another tree stress. This is on campus, Centennial campus, and here these little volcanoes. I would just suggest that next time they plant the trees 6 or 8 inches too deeply, because this is basically what they're doing. And I've dug down in here. This whole mess is a mat with grass and other stuff, roots growing all through it, and it's not doing the job that it was intended to do as far as protecting the roots. In fact, it's probably shedding water, that rainfall that would get down directly to that root zone. Pruning, if you have this kind of a situation here, you can see what happens over here to the right. This tree does not have much of a future, and if this tree were in front of my house, I'd be planting something right near it in anticipation of replacing that fairly shortly. So then you have to think about all these pests and decide what to do. Is this pest worth treating in the first place? Yeah, you've got some insects in there. What's it going to do? What if you did nothing? Is the tree going to recover on its own? And if you do have to treat, then what's going to be the cost to treat? So if it's just a cosmetic thing, are you going to spend a couple $100s for a cosmetic issue? Maybe you would, but you have to make that decision. We have lots of options, non-chemical things that we mentioned, certain biological control, whether it's passive biological control or active, and we have different choices of chemicals, those that are less harmful to the environment or the beneficials, and those that might be more persistent if that's what's required. Trees, pesticides can be applied to trees as a foliar spray, bark sprays, soil injections or drenches underneath, trunk or bowl injections, and in some cases aerial sprays even are out there. So kind of summarizing this, you need to identify what pests you've got out there, because that's going to determine all these other decisions that you're going to make, and decide whether you have to do anything, if it's worth doing anything at all in the first place, and choose the best treatment that you've got, and then just as a routine, try to reduce tree stress factors. And I didn't mention, we had several years of drought, and the West probably still has some drought there, but if you've got a specimen tree, if you're not paying too big a water bill, then it may be very much worth your while to water a tree. It's a lot of water, but to water a tree to keep that hydrated and healthy, so it was less likely to have some problems. This is our website. I plug this pretty much every talk for our insect notes, insects.ncsu.edu. And we're going to close up with just about 5 more slides. And I wanted to mention these just future threats of trees. And the first one, and you've probably heard of all of these, I guess, but the first one is the emerald ash borer, and this is one of the flathead borers. You can see it's not very big. It's smaller than the head of a penny, and it is a prime threat to ash trees. That's ASH, I said. I hope my microphone was working properly. Now it has been, all right, now it's been transported. You can see down here in the lower corner, it's a real problem in kind of the mid, let's say south of the Great Lakes maybe. But a year or so ago, it was found in Fairfax, Virginia. So it's moving right along. And Fairfax, maybe it's over here, I don't know. So it's moving right along, it's moving south, and you can see the damage here, but what's more important about this picture is that this is a picture of like firewood, and moving firewood is really a no-no. Under no circumstances should you really be moving firewood from any zone very far to another, because there's lots of stuff that has been transported by firewood that has created all sorts of problems. Then we have the red Bay Ambrosia Beetle, and this is, I can't remember the date, like 2004 or, let me see, no, 1999, okay, a couple of years ago. It was introduced down here near Charleston area or so, and it is mostly a problem down here in this area, but you see it's starting to go north from South Carolina. And red bay, you may not think of it too much as a serious tree, but especially in the maritime forests, it's a major tree and seems to perhaps wipe out 60–75% of the red bay trees that are there. And there can be some very large trees, actual real tree size. We think of these a bit more as an understory tree, but some very large trees that can be present down in this area. So this is one of these ambrosia beetles, and it transmits the disease and creates laurel wilt disease. So we're looking forward to that, but not very much. Then the Asian longhorn beetle's gotten lots of press. This had infestations in the Chicago area, and supposedly they have gotten that under control. But in the New York City area, it is still a problem. It's been a bit more, the New Yorkers haven't quite regulated it as well as the people in the Chicago area. So it's still around, and I'm not quite sure whether this is going to ever be eradicated or not, but they're working on it. And this longhorn beetle attacks a wide variety, or a wider variety, of hardwoods. So that's something to look forward to. Now here's a new one. I think this is my last one here. I say new. This is the walnut twig beetle. This is another ambrosia beetle, and this transmits 1,000 canker disease on black walnuts. And you can see, so far it's out here in Colorado. So hopefully, but we have black walnuts here, and hopefully it won't make this jump anytime soon. But this would be just one more threat to one more kind of tree that we have in North Carolina. We were blessed with so many different wonderful trees, and consequently that gives us opportunity to have attacks from lots of different ones. Oh, I did forget this Sirex wood wasp. This hasn't turned out to be quite as bad as we all thought, but it's still a potential problem. And this little wood wasp attacks living pines. This is introduced also. Living pines, and right now it's in New York and Indiana, and they are doing their very best to try to eradicate this and monitor it. But we do have pines down here in North Carolina, so that's something we've got to keep our eye on. So these are some people we should thank, and that's basically the end. And if you've got any questions, we can probably take like 3 or 4 minutes on the questions. And don't forget to hit that applause button.
And if you want to ask a question, if you'll hit the hand raised, then we'll be sure to get to all of them in order.
You don't have to ask a question. Okay, well, oh, we do have a question. Go, how do we do this here?
Katie.
John, you got that, or Lee? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Katie, you go ahead and ask.
Can you please go back over what the growth regulator was when you were talking with the bagworms and beetles?
Yeah, that was Dimolin, I think, if I recall, and I'm not sure how effective Dimolin is on the beetle borers, but it is fairly useful on a lot of some of the fly and the Lepidoptera, the caterpillars. And that's sometimes the municipalities and the governments will spray that, hoping that it's going to be more safe to the population.
Steve, can you spell the name of?
Can you spell out that product name for us, please?
Okay, it's Dimilin, and I may even be able to write it. That's the trade name. I can't quite remember what the actual active ingredient is. We have another question.
Any beetle you see with the antenna that wrap all the way around to the back of it, would that be an Asian longhorn?
No, not at all. There are a few beetles that are fairly similar, have that same shape and are black and white. So there's a website that I came across some time ago that has Asian longhorn beetle lookalikes, or things that are commonly mistaken for the Asian longhorn beetle. So if you Google Asian longhorn beetle, I think you'll probably come across that. But it looks like a lot of longhorn beetles. It's not that different, except for certain markings.
Okay, Steve, we had a question in the chat room. Robert has asked if you can suggest pesticides registered for diamondback moth on collards.
The answer to that is no, because I don't know that well. However, BT should work okay for that. And maybe while Mike is talking, I will Google something and see what I can find out are the current recommendations for that. Or one of the agents who probably deals more with vegetables could chime in here. Come on, Ann Edwards, I know you know the answer to that. Cindy, speak up. Okay, I'll be around here, and if we got time at the end, I'll answer some more questions, but let's make sure that the other two speakers have enough time. So I'm going to turn it back to somebody. Lucy, maybe.
I'll take it back from you. And echoed your BT recommendation for the moth on collards.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Okay.
At this time, we're going to move to the Plant Disease and Insect Clinic, and Mike Munster with the Department of Plant Pathology is going to go over what's happening now with diseases of interest in plants. Mike is the diagnostician at the clinic. He deals mostly with commercial ornamental samples, but from nurseries and greenhouses. Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Lucy. If everyone can hear me okay, click your green check there so that I know that I'm speaking at a good level and that microphone is working. It looks like a pretty good percentage. Daryl, can you hear me okay? All right. If anybody does have a problem, please don't hesitate to let me know. I am the diagnostician in the clinic responsible for commercial ornamentals, but I'll be talking about problems in the landscape today, and more than an apology, it's sort of an explanation ahead of time. For those who are mostly interested in vegetables, I'm not going to be really focusing on those. Hope to include more in future sessions here. Because my vegetable garden is pretty small still, and I think in most cases the things haven't come up yet enough to have too many problems, but they'll be coming. I'd like to start out with bit of, oh, I'm sorry, I've got to load my presentation here. Let me replace this. Apologize for the delay here, but what I want to do is start out with a few points about good samples. I think it's good to remind agents, master gardeners, homeowners, whoever, some of the things that we need in order to get a good sample to diagnose in the clinic. Let me just take, while this is loading, how many of you, if you could do your green check again, how many of you have sent samples here to the clinic? Yeah, and click your red X if you're a no. All right, let me tally that up here. Well, it's not letting me. It seems like do that again. Pretty good number. There we go. So over 50% of you have sent samples to the clinic. I'm sorry, was someone going to say something?
I'm sorry, I stepped away for just a second. This is Daryl Blackwelder.
Oh, Daryl, how you doing? All right, just a few reminders. Since we did talk about trees, I'm going to focus on that. Steve gave a nice presentation there. And let me just say, from our standpoint, a good diagnosis requires that we have material from all three plant systems: the foliage, the stems, including the trunk in the case of a tree, and the roots, along with their soil. One of the problems that we sometimes have here is someone will send in roots and they'll be just bare in the plastic bag, but they will have dried out and they're not as good for diagnosis or assay. So keep those with their soil. A good handful, good fistful of feeder roots along with the soil that accompanied them. Foliage, of course, because that's where oftentimes we see the symptoms. I didn't include flowers or fruits, but that would make sense in the case where that were showing symptoms. And then the stems and the trunk. So getting pieces of all three will really help us to come up with a good diagnosis for you. The second point I'd like to make is that the best samples have moderate symptoms, not something that's all dead and dry already, something that has good visible symptoms, and it includes transition zones. By that I mean if you've got a twig that has a dieback, that we get that area a few inches at least on either side of the margin between the dead area, the dead tissue, and the live healthy tissue. In the case of a canker on a trunk, if it's possible to send an entire tree, that's great, but in most cases that's not. But if you can get some shavings, again, from the different parts of the canker, including that transition zone, then that can help us to come up with a diagnosis. Third point is we love to have complete information, and by that I mean the information that we request on the form, including the often overlooked point about the percent of the planting infected. It helps us to know if only one tree out of 100 is affected, or if it's 99 out of 100 when we start our diagnostic process. So when we say percent of planting affected, that's what we really mean. Not, well, it's 50% of this tree. It would help to know that too, but that's not what the percent of planting affected is about. And please do try and get a good identification of the species of plant involved. We had a digital image submission just recently that was of some pictures that were supposed to be bean. They were just in the seedling stage, but you could tell they weren't bean. It was either some cucurbit or sunflower maybe, but it sure didn't look like bean. So complete information includes the identity of the host plant. Also, there's a section there for additional information, and that's where you can include things like what fertilizers or pesticides may have been applied, what period of time, let's say a tree was in the landscape or a shrub. That helps us a lot too in knowing what to look for. As Steve alluded to, that first year in the landscape, first year after transplanting is a difficult time, and a lot of trees and shrubs are lost in that period. The fourth point here is that a picture is worth 1,000 words. I know I don't have any pictures on this slide, so I'm violating this principle, but that will change in a moment. And what this does is, a lot of people, of course, nowadays have digital cameras and can take pictures of their problem in their landscape. And that helps us a lot because we're able to see the setting that it occurs in, what's happening on either side of it, how close it may be to a drainage area, what other plants are around it, how close it is to the house, to the driveway, to the street. All these things that give us clues when we're going through the diagnostic process. And at the bottom of the screen there is the website for the clinic, and there's a link there where you can click on submit, or on information on how to collect and submit samples that will be helpful in including not just trees but other types of plants as well. And I wanted to emphasize the trees because that's sort of the theme that we have today. Just a couple quick examples of things we received in the clinic. This was a commercial grower who didn't want to part with an entire plant or roots or anything, so just sent the tips of these twigs to the spruce, and it was not an adequate sample for us to be able to diagnose what's going on. Now, of course, there are cases where there are needle blights that can occur, and if it had been there, we would hope that we would have found them. But again, even if they had been, we still wouldn't have known what might have been going on. Some things that could have even been more serious, let's say, going down farther on the plant. Here's an example of a good sample that came in. This is 2 of 4 trees that were sent in the entire tree. So this is sort of our golden type sample where we can really work on it and look up and down in the roots and in the soil. I'll be making a few comments about those sort of things further. So any questions, first of all, about the aspect of sending samples to the clinic? All right, then let me go ahead and move on to some plant diseases and disorders of the day. We're going to start out with a question here. Take a close look at this situation here. What I'd like to point out is down here, a lot of leaves on the ground. This picture was taken, I'd say maybe 2 weeks ago here on campus. And if you look at the ground, you can see leaves here, magnolia, and also holly. So those pictures, if we can get the multiple choice here, thank you. What do you think those pictures represent? Click A if you think it's a fungal disease that's in the roots, B if you think there's a fungal disease in the foliage, C if you think it's a systemic viral disease, D if the problem is nematodes, or E if you think it's none of the above. You'll see the letters there corresponding to those choices up in the bar at the top of the screen. All right, let's score these here. And we've got, of those who answered, the 16 who answered E are correct. I didn't fool too many people with this. Maybe fooled a few transplants from the north, such as myself. But I see Diane there is celebrating her. All right, maybe if I can transfer the microphone here. Diane, do you want to comment on what this is? Well, we'll just continue on then, but probably a lot of you knew that what this really represents was just a natural senescence of older leaves. Evergreens are evergreen, but their individual leaves are not immortal, and after a couple of years of service, they're going to senesce and fall off. So that the spots that you see on the foliage there are just secondary fungi that have invaded the senescent leaf. And it turns out that magnolias and hollies, this time of year is when they're shedding those oldest leaves. Of course, pines, that occurs later on in the year, and you may actually get questions from people then too, wondering what's wrong with their pine tree when it's just the natural shedding of the oldest needles. So when you get into a situation more like this, that you would want to worry. Here, it looks like maybe last year's leaves are going yellow. The tree generally looks limp. The crown is thin. And so that's when you've got a more serious situation that you would want to worry about. This is a magnolia that's only about 100 yards, if that, from where I'm sitting right now. All right. As a pathologist, I like when we have diseases because they're interesting and we like to study them and grow them in the laboratory and so forth. But it turns out that abiotic or non-infectious problems are at least as important as the biotic diseases that affect our plants. I used to tell students that the organism most destructive to plants is Homo sapiens. A lot of times these abiotic problems are the prunings and the other things that we do, the mulching, like Steve had mentioned in his talk. But just to run down a couple of these and show a few pictures here, some of them that Steve did not touch on. Cold injury and transplanting and mulching problems, which we already had mentioned. Chemical injury, herbicides, or salt damage. Now, of course, everyone and their 5-year-old son practically is using Roundup these days, or some form of glyphosate, and that can cause a lot of problems on plants. Tomatoes, for example, are very sensitive, and the growing point turns a bright yellow. But trees can even have delayed effects. You might have glyphosate touch the tree, get on the tree in year 1, and year 2 is when you start to see the symptoms. And depending on when the application occurred, the symptoms may vary. So that's a frequent problem. Salts. When we talk about salts here, we don't just mean road salts used to melt ice, but just any accumulation of soluble salts in the soil that could be from, or most often would be from, fertilizers. So over-fertilizing causes burns on plants. Nutritional problems, including those provoked by soil pH being too high or too low, which we'll see. Flooding would be abiotic, but it's interesting that we don't frequently see flooding damage, where a tree has been flooded, the root system has been underwater for a couple of days, and the roots actually die of lack of oxygen. That's characteristic. The characteristic sign there is when you have the root turning black throughout. But really, the water problems are more because they're giving conditions favorable for some of the fungi that cause root rots. And we won't really talk about this now, but as the summer wears on, we may start to see drought stress, hopefully not like we have in 2 years ago, but it's something to be watching for, as well as air pollution in the urban areas especially. So let me just say a few quick things about cold injury. We had a beautiful winter this year. Snowed a couple of times, didn't have any ice storms, which was nice, but we still did get some cold injury. This is a gardenia shrub that right from my yard that we planted last year. So it wasn't too long in the landscape, and the cold knocked it back. Now, pretty much anybody could diagnose this one. That's known to be on the sensitive side. But sometimes it's more subtle, and you'll have to, well, I don't want to blow my question for in a minute here, but let me just show you a very characteristic symptom that occurs on cold-damaged plants, whether or not they're showing this much death, but you can see the bark just peeling away here. That splitting at the base of the plant is very characteristic of cold injury, although I won't say that it is going to be there in 100% of the cases. Now, here's the question. What do cold injury and Phytophthora root rot have in common? Anybody want to take a venture at that? Okay. Let's see. I'm not sure quite how to recognize Robert here.
Would it be localized dieback?
All right, localized dieback. What do you mean by localized?
Maybe showing itself more one limb at a time.
Okay, what I was thinking about was something else. I'll just jump to it. They have, and they can, both cause similar-looking symptoms, but the thing that they interestingly have in common is that in both cases, there may be a period of time between when the problem occurred, when the phytophthora are infected in the warm, wet spring, let's say, or when the cold damage occurred in the fall or in the spring, and then the onset of symptoms, or at least obvious foliar symptoms, may not occur until the plant is under some heat stress and drought stress in the summertime. So it was kind of funny. You send a sample to the clinic in August and you get the response back, well, that it was cold injury. Well, that's because you could have a sublethal injury to, let's say, the sapwood, but then it doesn't conduct enough water to keep the plant going when the going gets tough. All right, this one here is also a plant on campus. This area on the left, let me see if I can, these I think could be a problem lower down, something in the roots, something lower down on the stem here. But this one here, remember we're on abiotic problems, that one would be easy to diagnose, because if you look down at the base of that, you can see that what happened was that that branch had just simply been broken. So mechanical damage. Here is a sample that we received in the clinic not too long ago. I think it was the end of April, from Chowan County. This is a willow oak, believe it or not, and it's not a yellow variety. The person who submitted it was concerned about flooding having been the problem, but there was not evidence of flood damage to the roots. But here, the pH of the soil was 7.5, which is enough to explain what could be going on here. This is classic iron deficiency symptom. The newest growth, the leaves turning yellow between the veins themselves remaining green. And the reason is that at that high pH, the iron is not available. There may be iron in the soil, but it's not in a form that's available for uptake by the plant. Fortunately, high pH soils are not usually a problem here in North Carolina, and I'm not sure exactly what would have caused the problem in this case. Maybe an over-application of lime at the site or around it. So that is just a quick review of a few of the abiotic or non-disease problems that we can get. And if there are any questions about that. All right, then let's just look at a few other things that are living problems that you may be seeing now. On several of these, I'm going to go ahead and pose the question and see if people know what this is. Of course, the plant is Liriope, and what we're seeing are some spots here and blotches. Anybody know what this one is? All right, Johnston County.
The plant's just more pruned in the spring.
That's right. The disease actually is anthracnose, caused by a fungus called Colototricum, but the solution is simple. After the winter, in the spring, you've got to cut those dead leaves off and let the new flush growth come out clean. All right. These are some blackjack oak that Chuck Hodges brought in last week from somewhere down toward the coast. Any ideas of what this one is? see if I give you a hint. These blotches that were earlier a whiter color. Yes. That's leaf blister caused by the fungus Tophrina. And this you can see on many different kinds of oaks. I've seen it on live oak down toward, near the Outer Banks. And on, I'm not sure I've seen it on willow oak, but I know that it can occur on there, can actually cause kind of a twisting of the leaf, a deformation. Interestingly, this is related to the same fungus, or related, excuse me, to the fungus that causes leaf curl on peach, but it's not the same fungus, so it won't go from oak to peach or vice versa. Now, the interesting thing here too is that this fungus will only infect a young developing leaf. The spots may go from kind of a pale green blister bumped area. Now, let's turn it around, it would be a depressed area. May turn from pale green to the brown as the season wears on, but the disease is not actually spreading. In fact, new infections are not going to be occurring on old leaves, mature leaves. So it may give the illusion of continuing to spread, but that's not actually what's happening. The spores will hang out on plant surfaces over winter and then infect the next spring. This is not a serious disease. It's not going to cause lasting damage to the plant, and so there's really no application that you would do as a homeowner. Now, in a nursery, that might be different, but they would be applying before bud break even to try and control this particular fungus. Let's see if there was anything else I wanted to make sure. Oh yeah, cool wet weather during leaf development is what favors this, so that you can expect that it's going to vary from year to year how intense the disease is depending on the weather conditions. All right, this one pretty much everybody should know. Let me see a green check from people who have seen this. Do a red check if you have not seen it. Okay, let's call on Lee County here as I put up the, so 6 saying they have not seen it, 12 that have, and 24 aren't saying. Lee County, what is this? Leaf gall. Okay, maybe they don't have a microphone, but they typed it in there. This is leaf gall caused by the fungus Exobasidium. Here again, the infection occurred earlier. I'm not sure, and I don't know if anybody knows if infection occurs before the fungus overwinters in the bud or after. In other words, if it just exists as spores in the bud and then infects in the springtime. But the leaf develops with this thick gall, and then the white underneath is the sporulation, releasing the basidiospores that will blow to new plants. They can also form conidia. Now, I should mention that the one on camellia is, well, the ones on camellia are not going to infect azalea or vice versa. Those are two different leaf gall fungi, both Exobasidium, a different species. And there are actually a couple of species reported on camellias. Here, the recommendation would be just to pick these as early as possible before they get a chance to produce spores. I would not be recommending fungicide sprays here, and in any case, again, it would have had to have been applied at bud break when the infection occurred. You'll sometimes see these as they get older, get secondary fungi growing on the surface of the gall, but those are not the causal organism. The white powdery material is the sporulation of the fungus that caused the disease. All right. I'd be very interested to see the green checks from those of you who have seen this on flowering pear. and the red checks from those who haven't. This is a picture actually from last year, taken by one of our professors, Dr. Dave Ritchie, at his home in Durham. I'll give you another few seconds here to check. Oh, this is very interesting. And Edwards is the only one who at least is confessing to have seen this. All right, what this is quince rust caused by Gymnospermgium clavipes, a relative of the cedar apple rust. It turns out that this is not going to affect the leaves of the flowering pear, but it's going to affect the fruits, which you can see clearly here. These projections, these white projections, are the eschia of the fungus spoilating here. And it's also affecting the twig. You can see the swollen twig here that is full of eschia of the fungus. Last year there was, at least as far as I saw and heard, a lot of this, and I was curious as to what was going to happen this year. I went out, here's the name of the organism that causes it, and the common name of the disease. And out on a little stroll for Mother's Day morning in our neighborhood, we did come across some, this is just the other day now, fruiting here on a swollen twig of flowering pear in our neighborhood. Now, this is like cedar apple rust in the sense that it goes back and forth between a juniper host, such as red cedar, and a rosaceous host. This fungus will also infect hawthorn, quince, of course according to the name, and in some cases apple. It affects the fruit of the apple, not the leaves, so there it's different from cedar apple rust. And some apple varieties resistant to cedar apple rust are susceptible to this, and vice versa. Again, for the homeowner, there's really not a recommendation. The alignment of the stars, the right weather conditions during the time when the fungus is sporulating on the juniper and when the rosaceous host is susceptible is got to be right, so that if those conditions are favorable, then if they're unfavorable, then we're not going to see disease. And I don't know if we're going to see much coming up this year. I'm going to be very curious to be watching over the next few weeks, but I don't think it's going to be a recurring problem enough that we're going to have to talk about sprays, at least in terms of the flowering pears. So I'll be curious again to see how this develops. Now, some of you might be thinking, what about the eradication of the alternate host, to go out with the blowtorch that you can borrow from Steve Bambara after he gets it, and destroying all junipers within a radius of a kilometer or so around? Well, unfortunately for quince rust, at least one reference I read, it is not as distance limited in its spread as the cedar apple rust is, so that's not going to be an option either. Here's another picture from campus of, in this case, the twig, small twigs dying back on a Leyland cypress, and this turns out to be Ceridium canker, which we may, if we have time, try and show on the microscope here some spores of it. There are a number of things that, Ceridium we do see a lot on Leyland. Fortunately, we do not see it on arborvitae, but it's one of several problems that turned out that Leylands get. Also, Botrysphaeria canker, Phytophthora root rot, of course, and Passiflora on the leaves, but Passiflora tends to go from inside to the out. I see that my time is almost up here, but I can't leave without asking this question. You can put a green check if this appears to be a dangerous organism in the landscape, and a red check if not. All right, pretty much people know that this is the harmless slime mold, dog vomit slime mold, Fuligo septica, which has a hidden life as a plasmodium in the hardwood mulch, and then under the right conditions comes out and forms a sporulating body. You will often get questions from people. Isn't that time to tell an interesting story of a question I got from someone from the Department of Transportation about all the problem they're having with this at the rest sites on the highways, and it's considered unsightly there, but rake it out. It will not harm your plants. It will not harm you or your children, and we'll be seeing it, I'm sure, as the summer wears on. I'm going to skip my trick question at the end here because it is 11:30 and I need to turn this over to Dave. But I was going to ask if you would recognize this as a problem on azalea. And again, it's a trick question. Those of you who know it know that it's lacebug, but that's my way of turning the microphone over to my esteemed colleague from the other side of the aisle, Mr. Dave Steffen.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I'll be the first to thank Mike for his assistance in getting us set up with this. Hoping everybody can hear me here, because I'm a certifiable old geezer, and some of us old geezers don't pick up on this new technology quite so quickly as younger folks do. So, I didn't check with Steve Bambara before the talk began to see what he would be talking about, so you'll actually see some repeat of some of the things he said about scales and galls, but I'll go into them in a little more detail. This is a picture of me here. I'm the one on the left. That's one of our lab technicians on the right giving me a hand. And I'm going to move right along now and talk a little bit about scale insects. I want to say something about scales in general. These belong to a large group of insects that are called the homopterans, and homopterans include a great many serious crop pests. They cause damage directly by feeding on the plants, and also a great many of them can vector plant diseases, especially viruses. And as far as I know, all homopterans are plant feeders. They're close relatives. The hemipterans, the true bugs, some of them are plant feeders and some of them are predators. But so far as I know, all of the homopterans feed on plants. Now, scale insects are a large group within the Homoptera, and they're divided up into some 18 or 20 different families of scale insects, as we call major division of insects, call them families. And here in North Carolina, we probably have at least a dozen different families of scale insects, but most of the ones that you see on ornamentals are going to be either the soft scales, which Steve mentioned. These have soft bodies in the adult stage, or armored scales, which secrete a shell over their bodies. And the so-called soft scales are mostly tropical in distribution. We do have a number of species that are indigenous to the United States, and typically they have one generation a year, and they overwinter in most cases in a last stage nymph. And then come spring, they will shed their skins to the adult stage, and they will begin to feed and grow very rapidly. And one of the remarkable things about these scale insects is that even though they'll live for nearly a year, they'll complete 90 to 95% of the growth for their entire lives in just a few weeks in the spring. And the females expand very rapidly and begin producing eggs, and they literally turn into egg factories. A female will lay anywhere from several hundred to 1,000 or more eggs. This is one of the common coccid or soft scales that we see here in the Carolinas. It belongs to a group that are called the cottony scales. And we have several species around here. This one is on euonymus, but we commonly also see cottony scales on dogwood, azalea, holly, camellia, and maples, and some other hosts as well. And these are a little past their prime at this point. This little dark area at the end of this oblong-shaped structure is what's left of the female scale herself after she's completed laying her eggs. from special glands on the underside of her body, she will secrete these very fine white wax filaments by the hundreds. And embedded within those filaments are her eggs. And the eggs are protected from most predators and from weather, embedded in this matrix of wax filaments. And after a few weeks, they hatch out and begin to scatter on the leaves. I think these are some of the little crawlers we see right here. But in Mother Nature, if there is something out there, there will be something that is adapted to feed on it. And there is a species of lady beetle, which is a specialist feeding on scale insects. And somehow it can chew right into these white wax masses, we call it an ovisac, and get to the eggs and feed on them. But if you're going to be controlling these scales, they're going to be at their most vulnerable when they hatch from the eggs. This is what we call the crawler stage. And for many scale insects, the crawler stage is the only stage in their life when they are active. After that, they will settle down and spend the rest of their lives in one place. In case of some of these soft scales, they can get up and move around later, but they don't usually move too far. This is another one of the common soft scales we have here. Now, you might look at this and say, well, that looks like it's an armored scale. And in fact, it is a hard shell. But this is a soft scale, but it's one of the so-called lecanium scales. This one happens to be on willow oak, but they occur on a variety of other trees too, different species of lecanium scales. And they too overwinter as nymphs, and then they complete their development rapidly in the spring. And the female becomes hemispherical in shape, and she will lay eggs, and they're hidden underneath the body of the female. And she just dies and becomes this hard protective shell with maybe 1,000 or more eggs. If you knock one off, it looks like little pink dust underneath, but that dust is actually the tiny eggs. And excuse me, when they hatch, they will scatter out onto the foliage, spend the summer feeding on the foliage, and then they'll get up and move back to the stems to overwinter. I would recommend that if people have questions about controls, that they refer to or check with Steve Bambara about that, because he's the man who knows the information for chemicals and other procedures. Scale insects do have a wide range of natural enemies that attack them, and it's interesting that if you go looking for scale insects, it's not usually very productive to search for them in the wild, in natural areas, because it's hard to find them there. If you want them, you go look in landscapes, and that's where you'll find the heaviest populations of scales. And whether that's because trees are under stress and are more attractive to the scale insects or more susceptible to them, or if it's because the landscapes are less suitable for the natural enemies, the tiny flies and wasps and other things that attack them, whether they don't survive as well in the landscape, I'm not sure. But you can take a tree from the wild where it doesn't have a scale problem, move it to the landscape, and bang, you get the scale problems on it. Okay. Galls. Those of you who have participated in these in the past, know how much I love galls. They're a fascinating subject, and galls can be caused by a wide range of organisms. There are phytoplasmas and viruses and fungi and probably bacteria, nematodes, arthropods, and probably a few other groups of organisms that can cause galls. But we're going to be talking today here about some of the arthropods, the mites and the insects that can cause galls. And this is just a small cross-section of some of the galls that you're going to encounter on plants. This one is actually not a true gall, but it is caused by an areophyid mite. This one is on Chinese ligustrum, Ligustrum sinense. And areophyid mites are small even by the standards of mites. They are, most species, in the range of, say, 100 to 300 microns long. Now, 100 microns is 1/250th of an inch. They're 25 millimeters to an inch, and areophyid mite that's only 100 microns long is 1/10 of a millimeter. So these guys are extremely tiny, but what they lack in size, they can make up for in numbers and by whatever it is they secrete into the plant. Now in this case, they have caused the leaf to somewhat warp. It's deformed. I know it should be flat and smooth, but in this case it's become somewhat deformed. And this is a magnification of some of these areophyid mites on the leaf. This is an adult here, and we got some juveniles. Sorry, it's not the best picture. Here's some very young nymphs over here. And Mike is trying to do something to help out the...
Just ask if people can see your pointer.
Okay, oh, I'm sorry. Should I try using this pointer here?
Yeah, try that.
Okay. No, that one's not working.
You have to click on the picture.
Okay, all right.
Click and drag.
Click and drag. Okay, let's go back to the previous slide. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. This is an adult Areophyid mite, and these are some of the nymphs here. The Areophyids can do different things depending on the species of mite. Some of them are just free-living on the surface of the foliage, and we call them rust mites or russet mites. There's a serious one on tomatoes, especially in greenhouse tomato situation, called a tomato russet mite. And they don't usually do too much visible damage compared to the other kinds. Then there are Areophyid mites that get into the buds of the plant, and they can cause a destruction of the bud. We call them bud mites or blast mites. And then the third category are the true gall makers. And next image we got is a typical, oops, I'm sorry, I'm clicking on the wrong things here, and I've gotten myself screwed up. Yeah. All right. Sorry, folks. I'm a klutz when it comes to this stuff. All right. This is black gum, or tupelo, as it's sometimes called. And this is a common Areophyid mite on the tupelo. And each one of these little individual warts or knots is a gall, which has got a number of mites on the inside. They overwinter on the maybe in the bud or on the bark, I presume as eggs, and then come spring they hatch out and settle on the leaves and begin to feed. There's similar bud galls, or excuse me, these are sometimes referred to as pouch galls because they're hollow on the underside. And if we were to cut into one of these under a microscope, we would find the mites hiding within. One of the curious things about galls is their unpredictable distribution, both in space and in time. And you can be walking along, as I was the other day, looking for examples of galls, and I can pass by dozens of trees and not see any galls of a particular species on it, and then all of a sudden, bam, there's one tree that's just covered with them. Same thing from year to year. There are some years in which a particular species of gall may be present in the millions and actually cause significant damage to some trees, and then the very next year there'll be few or none on the same tree. And whether these are following some sort of internal cycle they have, a regular circadian, not circadian, but a cycle of peaks and valleys in their abundance, I'm not sure, or whether it's related to weather conditions. But that's one of the things that makes galls interesting, is that they can be unpredictable from one year to the next. Okay, we move on to the homopteran galls, and there are several groups of insects within the homoptera that produce galls. We have aphids, we have psyllids, we have the adelgids, like the hemlock lily adelgid that Steve referred to, and I'm going to just show you some of these here. These are called phylloxerans. This is another group of galls. They're related to aphids, and most of the phylloxerans we have here in North Carolina produce galls on hickory and pecan. And these are individual galls here, and we'll have one sliced open to see what it looks like on the inside. There's also a serious pest of grape called the grape phylloxera, and it occurs on the roots of the grape. And it devastated the European grape when it was brought over here from Europe because it had no natural resistance to the grape phylloxera, whereas our native muscadine grape does have some resistance. And Steve Bambara could tell you a lot more about this because he worked on muscadine grapes when he was a grad student. But they use rootstock from the muscadine grape and perhaps some of the other species when they're planting the European grape to give them some of the protection from phylloxerans. But these phylloxerans are typical spring galls. They appear on the new foliage as it's expanding, and they will be gone later in the summer. Here's a close-up of just a cluster of these phylloxera galls on the hickory. And again, this was a situation where I looked at a lot of hickory trees and couldn't find any, and then all of a sudden there was one tree that had a bunch. And I simply have no explanation as to why these things are of such spotty distribution like this. Now we sliced one of these open, just took a scalpel blade and took the top off of the gall. And inside each one of these galls, you'll have the original female, the one who settled on the leaf when she was a young nymph. And this is looking from the top to the underside of the leaf through the gall. And this is a little opening here. This is where the female initially began to feed, and the gall developed around her, and she moved into it. And it's hollow on the inside, and she's got a young family coming along. So here is actually one of the eggs. And then here and here are some of the younger nymphs. These are older nymphs. And eventually, after a few more weeks, this gall will be just packed full of these phylloxerans. And they will develop as a winged stage, which then will emerge through the gall will split open like a ripe fruit, and they will emerge and spread out and settle on the foliage and continue to feed for a while. And then they just disappear for the rest of the year. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure what they're doing, whether they're feeding on the foliage without producing any kind of symptoms, or whether they proceed then to lay an egg that will continue to spend the rest of the summer on the plant and stay there until the following spring. I'm not sure. But we do have a number of different species of them, and they're very difficult to separate the species, but they follow the same general life cycle. Another group of homopterans we get on plants are psyllids, and these are really kind of neat little insects. If you've seen an adult psyllid, they look sort of like a miniature cicada, and they're quite small. Most of them are no more than about 1/8 of an inch long, and they can jump. They're sometimes called the jumping plant lice. And some of them produce galls, and some of them feed more or less openly on the foliage. But one common one we have around here is the boxwood psyllid, and it causes the new growth of the boxwood to sort of cup like this. You get this cupping, and it's sort of a gall, and on the inside of these cupped leaves are where the nymphs develop. Many psyllids hibernate over the winter as adults and then emerge in the spring and fly to the appropriate host to lay their eggs. Curiously, many psyllid species overwinter on pine, even though they don't feed on pine as their primary host for the nymphs and for the galls. You know, why pine? Again, one of those mysteries of insect. But they only have one generation a year, and once these nymphs mature, they will leave the boxwood and probably go what we call diapause. It's sort of like a summer hibernation somewhere. Now, aphids, we don't normally think of aphids as producing galls compared to some of their relatives, but there are a number of aphid species that do so, and this is one of the more dramatic ones. This one is called the witch hazel leaf gall aphid. It's also sometimes called the witch hazel cone gall aphid, and it is a good example of those aphids which alternate hosts between two different plants. Many aphid species, whether they cause galls or not, they will spend part of the year on one species of plant and then the rest of the year on some totally unrelated species of plant, and often on a different part of the plant. For example, especially in the north, a lot of species overwinter on the roots of some kind of plant, and then in the spring they will emerge and fly to their summer host, where they will feed for a while before returning to their winter host for the winter. And here in North Carolina, this particular species, there are actually two of them. They alternate between birch and the witch hazel. And with this species, they overwinter on these as eggs on the stems of the witch hazel, and then in the spring they begin to feed on the young leaves, and then this gall develops around the individual female, and within she will be producing a number of young. This is just a close-up of one of the same leaves. This could be a cover picture or some, sharpen up the image a little bit, it'd be a great cover picture somewhere. So slicing this one open, we have a number of the nymphs inside, and we actually had some live footage of this, but I don't think we'll have time to show that. But these are a number of the aphid nymphs within one of those sliced open galls, and as with the phylloxerans on hickory, when they are mature, the gall will split open, the aphids will scatter, they will fly to the birch and spend the summer on the birch tree feeding and not producing any gall there at all. But then come fall, they'll produce another winged generation that will fly back to the witch hazel and lay the overwintering eggs. The other species that we call the spiny witch hazel gall aphid has a similar life history, spending the winter on as eggs on the witch hazel and then producing a gall in the spring. But it also has an alternate generation form in which they'll spend the winter as eggs on the twigs of birch trees, and then in the spring they hatch out, and they'll feed on the birch and produce these very roughened leaves, kind of a corrugated look to the leaves. And we frequently get that sent in here, but unfortunately we haven't had any sent in so far this year, so I can't show you a picture of it. But they will hatch out eventually and then fly to the witch hazel and produce the galls on witch hazel. So it gets very complicated sometimes with these insects that have the alternating generations and alternating hosts. These are examples of some of the psyllid galls. As I said, the psyllids are the critters that look like little tiny cicadas, and they occur on a wide range of hosts. This particular one is on hackberry, and one thing I should mention about galls is that different species of gall makers are extremely host specific, often to a single species of plant, or in most cases, or at least to a single genus of plant, and usually only to certain species within that genus. For example, amongst the gall wasp, of which there are hundreds and hundreds of species that occur on oaks around here, there is no case where any species of gall wasp is known to feed on species of oaks in both the white oak and the red oak group. They're either found on all white oak species or on all red oak species, but they never cross that line between the two groups of oaks. So we do have several species of these psyllids that occur on hackberry around here, and we have a beautiful big old hackberry tree right outside the building where in years past I was able to reach the lower branches with a net and sweep the net and collect at least 4 different species of these psyllids off that tree. Unfortunately, the grounds crew around campus here has limbed up most of these trees, so you need to be up on a ladder to try and reach even the lowermost limbs. But these galls are still fairly young. They're pretty solid, and the nymphs that are developing within are quite young, and they're in little individual chambers. But as with many of these other homopteran galls, eventually the nymph will mature, and the gall will split open and release the young psyllid to fly off and spend somewhere for the winter. Okay, I just have a few images of midge galls. All the gall midges belong to a single family, and gall midges occur on a very wide range of hosts. There's a few that occur on oaks, and this one is where the leaf margin is folded over, and they belong to a category of galls that are called purse galls, or pouch galls. I think purse gall is a more common name because it's where the leaf tissue has folded over and closed, kind of like a purse. And if I were to open this up, there would be the little larvae of the midge gall within. They're usually rather inconspicuous, at least this one on oak, and when the larvae are mature, they will drop to the ground and pupate in the soil. I was looking for some other more dramatic kinds of galls in the past couple of weeks here. Unfortunately, I couldn't find some of the really cool ones, but this is an interesting example of one of the few kind of midges that we get on oaks around here. Okay, the gall wasps, there are hundreds of species of these things just in the United States alone, and the vast majority of gall wasps are found on oaks. Probably less than 10% of the gall wasps we have here are found on hosts other than oaks, and most of those are in plants in the rose family. So I'm going to pick up the pace a little because we're getting late here. You saw a picture of one of these knot galls or gout galls or potato galls that Steve showed you. This is on live oak. There are several species of these galls on different species of oaks, and the gall wasps themselves, here's a group of some of the wasps that emerged from that particular gall. Most gall wasps are no more than 1/4 inch long, between 1/8 and 1/4 inch long. They're typically kind of a reddish brown to black in color, have fairly long antennae as you see here, and clear wings, with the hind wing much smaller than the front wing. Gall wasps are difficult to identify. It's a whole lot easier to identify them from the gall itself, knowing what the gall looks like and what the host... I'm sorry, I did it again. Oh, all right, I messed up. Mike's gonna get us back to where I belong. I apologize. Okay. Clicked on the wrong button. All right, here we go. All right, here is another unidentified gall wasp this was on a white oak. I don't know what this one is. I haven't tried looking it up yet, but it's just a typical gall that's on the midrib of the leaf. This is another unidentified one, and another unidentified gall wasp. And I cut some of these open, and there are some very young larvae in, so these galls are not fully developed yet. It'll be interesting to go back to the tree that I picked this leaf from and watch these galls as they develop. This is on one of the red oaks. This is our probably most distinctive, best known of the gall wasp galls. This is called the wool sower gall, or oak seed gall. It's found almost exclusively on northern white oak. Occasionally they'll get on post oak, which is a common relative or close relative of northern white oak. But again, this is one of those galls that you may find several of them on one sapling, and then you can look on dozens or hundreds of other white oak trees and not find another one. If we slice it open, we can see the individual cells within this gall. These are some of the more mature cells here, and they correspond to the little pink dots that you saw on the surface of the gall. These are some younger cells down within, and although they don't show up very well, there are some larvae that are visible here. Okay, I'm at 11:56. That was the last slide I had, and I'm going to stop here and see if we have any questions about some of this stuff. Okay, what do? I click my mic off. Which question? No question. Those are some questions. Your mic is on. Okay. I don't see any questions.
David, I saw you had a few other slides. You want to go through those?
I'm sorry, what?
I saw you had a few other slides. Did you want to go through those?
Okay.
You have a minute or two?
They were added at the end. All right, this is an image that Steve Bambara submitted. And Steve, did you want to say something about it or ask a question about it?
Well, I didn't submit it exactly, and I don't quite know where that county is, but somewhere. This was from Randolph County, and I was wondering if you wanted to speculate on the damage on this box elder.
Well, the damage looks kind of...
Okay,
the damage looks pretty erratic. At first glance, I might suspect it was some sort of caterpillar like a fall cankerworm or spring cankerworm. But the nature of some of those notches and holes there makes me wonder if this is some sort of mechanical damage, wind damage, or things that are falling on the leaf. Did you know the answer to this one, or am I just making a wild guess?
You were swagging the same swags that we did.
Swagging the same swags. All right. In particular, when I look at a notch like this in the leaf, that just doesn't look like a caterpillar or some other insect fed like that, or the same way. It looks more to me like something fell and just ripped the leaf as it fell, like a pine cone or even pine needles can punch a hole right through a leaf as they come down. But that's just a best guess. We've certainly had enough wind damage around this area in the past month. All right, if we can, I don't know if we can do this on camera. Mike, should I just hold it up to the camera or what? All right.
I'm going to activate the video camera now here. So let's see if this works.
Okay, this is a millipede. Caught it. It's not going to cooperate and sit still. And can't really get it up there in the camera. Okay, well, I just want to say something briefly about millipedes. We have a number of species around here. Some of them are quite colorful, as you see this from this. It's because they have some pretty nasty protective chemicals. Most millipede species are protected by chemicals, some of which are cyanide-related chemicals. And they're pretty much harmless for the most part. They live in leaf litter, in the soil, in rotten wood, and they feed on dead plant material. There are a few millipede species that do feed on living plants, and there are some millipedes that are predators on other millipedes. But as I said earlier, in nature, if there's something that grows, something will feed on it. And there is a group of beetles called glowworms. They're closely related to fireflies, and glowworms are specialists that feed on millipedes. And the larva of the glowworm will be crawling through the leaf litter, and when it encounters the right kind of millipede, it'll attack it, and apparently the chemical defenses of the millipede do it no good when a glowworm comes along. So unfortunately, the glowworm does not attack any of the introduced species of millipede, and particularly one we call the garden millipede, which is that one that is such a nuisance getting into homes. It'll start showing up soon, crawling on the sides of houses, sometimes in huge numbers. But millipedes are generally beneficial, and they're feeding in the dead leaf litter, and generally harmless to people unless you eat some of these things. That's not recommended, but most people know better than that. Just appreciate them as another example of the food chain out there in the naturals in the ecosystem. Okay, we're at 12 now. Do we have any last questions, comments people want to make about anything we've done here today? Okay, where the hell is that? All right, Lucy, I guess back to you then.
You ready to go? Okay, I think the last thing we wanted to do is just give you a quick overview of what's coming, and this is available on the website as well. So you can see we're going to be doing organic gardening next month. Steve Moore from the Center for Environmental Farming Systems is going to be on with us. Will Hooker will be doing August. We'll be doing permaculture. And oops, I got it backwards. June is going to be rain gardens, and July is organic gardening, and August is permaculture. I hear the echo, and I'm not sure what that's about, guys. Each one of these sessions will also be featuring Mike and Dave with plant pathology and entomology. Look forward to hearing from you guys about how to make this a more effective tool for you and your master gardeners. If you have any suggestions, please send them to me, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Any comments or suggestions anybody wants to share before we sign off today? I'm seeing some of you are putting your numbers into the chat box. If you will also please go to the website that is the wiki that allows you to input your data there, then it'll tally it all for us, and that'd be great. Okay, I'll stay on for a minute or two in case somebody has any questions out there, and otherwise we're done. Thank you, guys. If you were logged on as an individual and you weren't at your county's host site, would you please get in touch with your county agent and let them know that you were on so we can get accurate numbers about how many people are attending the workshops? This will be really helpful to us as we're trying to get support and equipment to improve the program, if we can have accurate numbers about how many people are actually benefiting from or participating in the program. So again, if agents will log their numbers onto the wiki And if individual master gardeners who've logged on separate from their county agent host site, just let your agent know that you did that so they can add your numbers into the numbers they've already got. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good job, Lucy.
Same to you.
Yeah, likewise, you guys.
Yeah,
let us know when the next practice is.
We still have a few people on, but is there anything that's... I thought it went well, and the fact that we didn't have to actually shut down on the exact moment was good.
I think that's a huge benefit of being on the Illuminate versus the satellite. There's a little bit more flexibility on the end.
We need to adhere to the schedule, but at least we don't have to worry about it dying out on us. And I thought the video looked pretty good to me. I already had mine set for fairly good quality. So.
One of the things that I wish I had done is just given them a heads up about that they could adjust their quality by, you know, when the video thing came on, to tell them in the bottom left corner they could go to find color, because on my machine it comes up as the default is coarse gray, which is not very inspiring.
Well, it does with mine too, except it didn't this time, so I don't know what was going on with that. But I don't know also if some of them are on wireless, if the video would hold up or not. So, okay, I guess I'm signing out.
Alrighty, bye-bye.
Alright, hope you feel better.
Thank you.
Okay, and you are not going to be next week, or next time, or you are?
No, I will be out of town next time.
Okay, well,
so I will
we'll
not.
miss you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Lucy.
Yes.
One quick question. On our end here, the banner of pests, plants, pests, and pathogens turned out pixelated. Was that because I used the compression on the images before I loaded it, or does it always do that?
I would guess it was because of the compression, but I'm not sure. That'd be a good question for Lee J. or for John.
Okay, I'll try and remember to ask them before next time.
Do you want to try to put up your video?
No, what we'll do is if we have some videos for next time, we'll do that. I'll make sure and do it ahead of time, long enough ahead of time that I can convert them to a flash file and do it that way.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Any other questions from anybody?
Yeah, Lucy, this is Alan Durden in Macon County. I can't seem to get the numbers into the logon sheet. I put them in on the edit page, but they're not showing up. I'll send you via email the numbers that we had here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, goodbye.